I found 47 thermal cameras hardwired into trees I've marked as healthy. Each one cost $3,200. My wife's firm billed the Forest Service $890,000 for ecosystem protection. The Douglas fir's bark felt rough against my palms as I checked my climbing harness one more time. 200 years this tree had been growing, and here I was, about to disturb its morning peace for another routine health assessment. The mist hung thick in the canopy 40 feet above, droplets catching the early light like tiny prisms. I shouldered my equipment pack and pulled out my assessment checklist. Just another day in the office, I muttered, though my office happened to be vertical and alive. The forest around Whitman Creek Preserve was waking up. Birds calling from hidden perches, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, that clean smell of moss and earth that never got old. My steel-toed boots found their first purchase on the furrowed bark. The familiar weight of my increment borer and pruning shears on my tool belt felt reassuring. 23 years I've been climbing trees professionally, and the rhythms still calm me. Hand over hand, finding the natural footholds, letting the tree guide me up. The world below fell away as I ascended. This was where I belonged, suspended between earth and sky, surrounded by living wood that had stories to tell if you knew how to read them. The morning sun filtered through the ancient branches, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across my path. At 30 feet, I paused to catch my breath and survey the canopy around me. That's when I noticed something off about the oak tree 10 feet to my left. My trained eye caught a line running up the trunk that didn't match the bark pattern. Too straight, too uniform. I secured my position with a carabiner and studied the anomaly more carefully. That's not natural growth, I whispered to myself. The line had the texture of bark, the right color, but the geometric precision bothered me. In 23 years of canopy work, I'd learned to trust my instincts about what belonged in a tree and what didn't. The morning sounds seemed to fade as I focused on this irregularity. My pulse quickened slightly, not from the climb, but from professional curiosity mixed with something else. Concern, maybe. This was protected forest land. Nothing should be modified here without proper permits and environmental impact studies. I rappelled over to the oak, my gear making soft, metallic sounds as I moved. The suspicious line was definitely artificial once I got close enough to touch it. My fingers traced along what felt like a fiber optic cable disguised with some kind of bark-textured coating. Someone's been modifying these trees, I breathed, pulling out my work phone to document what I'd found. The implications started racing through my mind. Unauthorized access to protected land, potential environmental damage, possible surveillance equipment. My hands shook slightly as I photographed the cable from multiple angles, noting its precise routing along the trunk's natural contours. Whoever installed this knew what they were doing. Both the climbing and the camouflage were professional quality. Following the cable's path upward, I discovered it led to something hidden in a natural hollow, 35 feet up the oak's trunk. My heart was pounding now as I climbed to investigate. The hollow had been modified, enlarged and fitted with what looked like a weatherproof junction box. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, carefully prying open the casing. Inside were circuit boards, battery packs, and electronics that definitely didn't belong in a nature preserve. This wasn't some amateur operation. The equipment looked expensive, sophisticated. The peaceful forest suddenly felt different, violated, like someone had been watching, recording, monitoring this sacred space without permission. My hands moved methodically, photographing everything. Manufacturer labels, serial numbers, cable connections. Professional training took over, even as my mind reeled with questions. Who had installed this? Why here? How long had it been operating? And most importantly, was this the only one? I spent the next hour tracing cables, discovering the network extended much further than I had initially thought. At least 6 trees in my immediate survey area showed signs of modification. Each connection point revealed careful installation by someone with both climbing experience and technical knowledge. This isn't random, I realized, plotting the locations on my assessment map. The pattern suggested systematic coverage of the preserve's interior, completely invisible from ground level. My professional pride stung. Someone had used advanced tree climbing techniques in my territory without authorization. The scope of what I was seeing indicated significant planning and resources. This wasn't a weekend hobbyist project. This was organized, well-funded, and deliberately hidden in the one place most people would never look, 40 feet up in the forest canopy. I clipped my gear and started my descent, mind spinning with the implications. 23 years protecting these forests, and someone had turned them into a surveillance network right under my nose. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The radio static cut through the forest silence like a chainsaw. Tom, you copy? How's the Whitman Creek assessment going? Marcus's voice jolted me back to earth, though I was still 40 feet up in the oak. My thumb hovered over the transmit button. 23 years of morning check-ins, and I'd never hesitated like this. The surveillance equipment felt like it was burning a hole in my peripheral vision. Still working on it, Marcus. Found some interesting conditions up here. The words came out careful, measured. How do you explain discovering a spy network to your supervisor over open radio? Every word could be monitored now. Hell, maybe it already was. Copy that. Take your time with the assessment. City Council's breathing down my neck about those budget reports, but accuracy comes first. Roger. Tom out. I clipped the radio back to my belt, hands shaking slightly. The normal rhythm of work felt surreal now. Marcus was probably sitting in his office, coffee getting cold, worried about paperwork. Meanwhile, I was perched in a tree that had been turned into a surveillance post. The disconnect made my stomach churn. Below me, the forest floor looked peaceful, innocent. Hikers would walk these trails this afternoon, families would have picnics, kids would chase squirrels, none of them knowing they were being watched from above. I forced myself to focus. Follow the main cable, find the source. Climbing higher, I traced the primary line toward the oak's crown. The installation became more sophisticated the further up I went. Junction boxes at strategic intervals, weatherproof connections that could survive decades of storms. Whoever did this wasn't planning on coming back for maintenance. At 60 feet, nearly in the tree's crown, I found it. Jesus Christ. The thermal imaging camera was a work of art. Military-grade housing, matte black coating that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. The lens assembly moved with mechanical precision, scanning the forest floor in programmed sweeps. Every few seconds it would pause, focus on something below, then continue its patrol pattern. My hands trembled as I raised my phone to photograph it. This wasn't some hobbyist's trail cam. This was the kind of equipment I'd seen in documentaries about border surveillance, the stuff that could track heat signatures through dense foliage. The housing bore no manufacturer marks, no serial numbers visible from my angle. Professional installation, professional equipment, professional concealment. Someone had invested serious money in watching this forest. I steadied myself against a branch and studied the camera's mounting system. Vibration dampeners isolated it from the tree's movement. Weatherproof seals protected every connection point. The engineering was impressive, even as it made my blood boil. Who has this kind of resources? I whispered to myself. The camera's power source caught my attention next. No solar panels, no external battery packs. Instead, an elegant kinetic energy system harvested electricity from the tree's natural movement in the wind. Micro-generators at stress points converted the oak's gentle swaying into steady power. Brilliant. Completely self-sufficient. The camera could operate indefinitely without human intervention. I photographed everything I could reach, documenting angles and connections. The installation had required serious climbing skills. Whoever installed this knew their way around the canopy as well as I did. Maybe better. The thought stung my professional pride. Someone had been working in my forest, using techniques I'd spent decades perfecting, and I'd never noticed. They'd turned protected wilderness into a monitoring station right under my nose. I started my descent, mind racing through implications. This wasn't simple trespassing or even environmental crime. This was surveillance on a scale that suggested government backing or serious corporate money. The kind of operation that could destroy careers, end marriages, ruin lives if you got on the wrong side of it. Back on the ground, I reviewed my photographs while the magnitude of my discovery settled in. The thermal camera alone probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Add the power systems, the network infrastructure, the professional installation. Someone had invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in watching this forest. This has to be reported, I muttered, though my gut churned with uncertainty. Report it to who? Marcus would escalate to the city. The city would involve state environmental agencies. State agencies would bring in federal oversight. By the time the bureaucracy finished grinding through proper channels, whoever installed this equipment would have months to cover their tracks. But what if I was wrong? What if this was some legitimate research project I didn't know about? What if I was about to destroy my career over a misunderstanding? The forest around me felt different now, violated. Every shadow could hide another camera. Every tree could be compromised. The sanctuary I'd spent my life protecting had been turned into a surveillance grid, and I was the only one who knew. I packed my gear with deliberate care, muscle memory taking over while my mind churned. The morning sun climbed higher, filtering through leaves that might be hiding watchers. My routine assessment had uncovered what could be federal crimes, and I was carrying the evidence in my phone. The question wasn't whether to report this anymore. The question was who I could trust with information this sensitive. The wrong person could bury this investigation before it started. The right person could expose something that needed exposing. I shouldered my pack and took one last look up at the oak's crown. Somewhere above me, that thermal camera was still scanning, still recording, still watching. The peaceful forest preserve had become something else entirely, and I was the only one who knew the truth. The walk back to my truck felt like crossing a minefield. Every step took me further from the evidence, but closer to a decision that could change everything. My climbing spurs bit into the western hemlock's thick bark as I ascended to the main trunk junction. The morning mist hung heavy around me, muffling every sound except my controlled breathing and the soft scrape of metal against wood. 40 feet up, I found it. Another thermal camera. This one was even more sophisticated than the first, hardwired directly into the tree's vascular system with surgical precision. I steadied myself against the trunk and leaned in close. The device bore serial numbers I recognized from military contractor catalogs. Northrop Grumman. Defense-grade equipment that cost more than I made in 6 months. What the hell? I whispered, photographing the installation from every angle. The cable management was flawless, professional. Whoever installed this knew exactly what they were doing, and they had the budget to do it right. Weatherproof housing, redundant power systems, encrypted data transmission. This wasn't some weekend warriors hunting setup. I rappelled down and moved to the next marked tree, a massive old-growth cedar about 200 yards east. The forest floor seemed to watch me as I walked, every shadow suddenly suspicious. My boots crunched through the understory, but the usual forest sounds, birdsong, rustling leaves, distant water, felt muted. Wrong. The cedar revealed the same setup. Another camera, same military markings, same professional installation. I pulled out my GPS unit and marked the coordinates, then checked my field notebook. The pattern was becoming clear. 200 yards, I muttered, sketching the positions. Perfect grid formation. I climbed 4 more trees over the next hour. Every single one had a camera. The fiber optic cables ran through hollowed branch channels that followed natural growth patterns, work that required intimate knowledge of tree anatomy and years of climbing experience. The canopy creaked overhead as wind moved through the rigging points, but the mechanical hum of electronic equipment created an underlying drone that didn't belong. My hands started shaking as the scope became clear. This surveillance grid covered the entire preserve boundary, maybe beyond. Someone had turned these ancient trees into electronic sentinels, and they'd done it with surgical precision. At the base of a Douglas fir that had been standing when Lewis and Clark passed through, I found something that made my blood freeze. Hidden in a natural cavity between the massive root buttresses was an encrypted solid-state drive, military-grade waterproofing, tamper-evident seals intact, blinking status lights that pulsed like a heartbeat. I knelt in the damp earth and aimed my flashlight into the cavity. Data cables snaked up through the trunk's interior, following the tree's natural vascular pathways. The installation was so seamless, it looked like the tree had grown around the equipment. This level of integration required months of planning, and someone who understood forest ecosystems at a molecular level. But it was what I found zip-tied to the camera housing that destroyed me. My own handwriting, on a laminated tree assessment report, my signature at the bottom, optimal mounting points for research equipment, I read aloud, my voice cracking. Load-bearing capacity, 2,400 pounds. Seasonal movement patterns minimal due to trunk diameter and root stability. I'd written this report 6 months ago. A routine assessment for what I thought was a graduate student's research project. Someone had taken my professional analysis, my expertise protecting these trees, and weaponized it against them. The irony cut so deep, I could taste copper in my mouth. Every recommendation I'd made to preserve the forest's health had been used to violate it. My careful documentation of structural integrity had become an installation manual for surveillance equipment. I climbed higher into the canopy, my movements automatic despite the rage building in my chest. 60 feet up, I discovered something that made the hair on my neck stand up. The cameras weren't just recording, they were tracking. Motorized gimbals pivoted to follow my position as I moved through the branches. Red targeting lights blinked in sequence, maintaining visual contact. The mechanical whirring sounded alien against the natural forest soundscape, like insects made of metal and malice. My heart hammered against my ribs as the realization hit. I'd been watched this entire time, every movement cataloged, every discovery recorded. The trees themselves had become electronic eyes, and I was the subject under observation. I pulled my arborist tablet from my tool belt with trembling fingers. The diagnostic port on the nearest camera was standard military issue. I'd seen them before on forestry research equipment. But when I connected and downloaded the calibration data, my worst fears were confirmed. Heat signature settings. Ignore targets under 140 pounds. Temperature differential algorithms designed to distinguish human body heat from natural thermal variations. Motion detection parameters specifically calibrated for bipedal movement patterns. This is human surveillance, I breathed, staring at the data streaming across my screen, not wildlife protection. The environmental cover story crumbled like rotten bark. These cameras weren't protecting the forest from poachers or monitoring animal populations. They were tracking people, specifically, deliberately, and someone with access to my professional assessments had used my work to make it happen. The forest around me felt different now, violated. Every tree I'd climbed, every health assessment I'd completed, every recommendation I'd made to preserve these ancient giants, all of it had been perverted into something that watched and recorded and violated the very sanctuary I devoted my life to protecting. I needed to know who was behind this, and I needed to know why they'd chosen to destroy everything I believed in. I descended tree by tree, following the fiber optic cables like a digital breadcrumb trail through the forest canopy. Each connection point revealed another camera, another violation. My GPS unit beeped steadily as I marked coordinates. The network stretched far beyond what I'd imagined. 60 feet up in a massive Douglas fir, I stopped and pulled out my tablet. The mapping software painted a picture that made my stomach drop. Red dots scattered across the screen like a digital rash. Camera positions spanning the entire preserve and bleeding into private property boundaries. 847 acres, every hiking trail, every camping area, every residential access point where families brought their kids to see the old-growth trees. Jesus, I whispered, watching the data populate. The scope was staggering. Someone had built a surveillance state in the wilderness, using my professional recommendations as their blueprint. Morning light filtered through the leaves as I traced cable runs with my binoculars. The network formed perfect, overlapping fields of view. No blind spots, no gaps in coverage. Military precision in civilian forest. This wasn't environmental protection. This was human tracking on a scale that violated every federal wiretapping law I could think of. I rappelled down and moved to the next tree, a red cedar that showed fresh installation scars. At the base, scattered equipment told a different story than the polished operation above. Climbing harnesses lay tangled in the undergrowth, a cordless drill with bark shavings still clinging to the bit. Chemical-stained respirators abandoned in the moss like discarded surgical masks. The cleanup had been hasty, panicked. Fresh gouges in the bark showed where someone had slipped, their spikes tearing long gashes in the living wood. I ran my fingers along the wounds, feeling the tree's pain in my own chest. This was butchery disguised as conservation. Something glinted in the moss near my boots. A medical bracelet, half buried like evidence someone tried to hide. I brushed away the debris and read the engraving. Jennifer Walsh, spinal injury alert. Emergency contact, Cascade Medical. My hands trembled as I photographed it. Someone had been hurt badly during this installation. The abandoned equipment, the hasty cleanup, the medical alert bracelet left behind, pieces of a human disaster scattered at the base of a violated tree. Jennifer Walsh. The name meant nothing to me, but her pain was written in the bark above and the blood-stained respirator at my feet. This operation had cost more than money and environmental integrity. It had cost flesh and bone. I climbed back to my truck, my tool belt heavier with each step. The forest felt different now, not sanctuary, but crime scene. Every tree I'd assessed, every recommendation I'd made had been perverted into something that watched and recorded innocent families. At the truck, I opened my laptop and pulled up my assessment reports. Cross-referencing camera locations with my professional recommendations made my blood run cold. Every single installation site matched my notes perfectly. Structurally sound mounting points with optimal sightlines. My own words, written months ago. Recommended for long-term monitoring equipment due to branch stability and canopy access. The laptop screen glowed against the dashboard as I cross-referenced camera coordinates with my handwritten assessments. Every red dot on the map matched a tree I'd personally evaluated. Douglas fir, number 47. Red cedar, number 23. The ancient oak, where this all started. My own professional signature on each report, now weaponized. I slammed the laptop shut. The metal click echoed through the truck cab. Time to go home. Time to face Elena. The drive back felt different now. Every tree I passed could be watching. The forest canopy that used to feel like sanctuary now pressed down like a surveillance net. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough to leave marks. Our house sat at the end of Maple Street, the same craftsman bungalow where we'd planned our environmental consulting dreams. Elena's Subaru was in the driveway, EcoGuard environmental stickers covering the rear window like badges of honor. I parked behind it and sat there for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. The front door opened before I reached it. Elena stood in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in that precise bun, green eyes studying my face. She wore her tailored earth-tone blazer, the one she called her client meeting armor. "You're home early," she said. Her voice carried that measured professional tone she used with difficult stakeholders. I walked past her into the living room. The walls were covered with her environmental awards: Sustainable Business Leader, Forest Conservation Advocate, Ecosystem Protector of the Year. All of it felt like a lie now. "We need to talk." I pulled the thermal camera from my gear bag, setting it on our coffee table between the organic cotton throw pillows. The military-grade housing looked obscene against our recycled wood furniture. Elena closed the door with deliberate precision. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon light streaming through our energy-efficient windows. "I see you found one of our ecosystem monitoring devices." Ecosystem monitoring? I pulled out the encrypted drive, placing it next to the camera. This was hardwired into a Douglas fir's vascular system. 60 feet up, she moved to the opposite side of the coffee table, her fingers tracing the camera's edge like she was examining a specimen. EcoGuard's latest conservation technology. We're protecting critical habitat from illegal activities. I spread my tree assessment reports across the table. Red circles marked every camera location, my handwriting, my professional measurements, my detailed canopy access notes. You used my work, my professional evaluations to plan these installations. Elena's composure flickered for just a moment. Her jaw tightened slightly before the environmental consultant mask snapped back into place. Your expertise helped us protect 847 acres of irreplaceable forest ecosystem. I documented those trees for conservation, not surveillance. My hands shook as I pointed to specific coordinates. The weight of professional betrayal settled in my chest like a physical presence. These are heat signature settings calibrated for human tracking, Elena, not wildlife protection. She walked around the coffee table, approaching my side with measured steps. When she spoke, her voice carried that passionate conviction that first drew me to her environmental work. "Do you have any idea what we've prevented? 3 illegal logging operations that would have destroyed old-growth corridors. 2 development schemes targeting protected wetlands." I looked up at the woman I'd married. seeing someone I didn't recognize overlaid on familiar features. And you did this by spying on private property owners? Installing surveillance equipment on federal land without permits? Elena's eyes held conviction, not guilt. By protecting what matters most. Sometimes traditional methods aren't enough against billion-dollar development interests. I pulled out the photos I'd taken of Jennifer Walsh's medical bracelet, the abandoned climbing gear. Jennifer Walsh fell 35 feet installing your cameras. No safety equipment, no proper training. Elena's composure faltered. Her hand reached toward the photos before pulling back. That was a contractor oversight. We've since implemented comprehensive safety protocols. After she was already paralyzed, my voice hardened. Miguel Santos can barely breathe from chemical exposure to your battery systems. No respiratory protection, no hazmat training. Elena straightened, her environmental consultant persona reasserting itself like armor. Every meaningful conservation effort involves calculated risks. We're fighting entities with unlimited resources using whatever tools we can access. I stared at the woman who shared my bed, seeing a stranger calculating human suffering against environmental gains. You falsified safety training records for 8 technicians. I found the documentation to expedite critical habitat protection. Her wedding ring clicked against the coffee table as she gestured. The sound echoed through our living room. Sometimes bureaucratic compliance becomes the enemy of urgent conservation needs. The afternoon light shifted through our windows, casting long shadows across the surveillance equipment. Our home, filled with sustainable materials and environmental certifications, suddenly felt like a facade hiding something darker. This isn't conservation, Elena. This is corporate surveillance dressed up in environmental rhetoric. She moved closer, her voice dropping to that intimate tone she used when trying to convince me of difficult decisions. Tom, you've spent your entire career in the canopy. You see individual trees. I see the entire ecosystem under threat. I stepped back from the workbench, my boots scraping against concrete. The distance felt necessary, physical space to match the emotional chasm opening between us. You saved $284,000 by cutting safety protocols. I've seen EcoGuard's billing records. Elena's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, her environmental mask slipped. What emerged underneath was pure corporate calculation. Those funds went directly into expanding our conservation footprint. Every dollar saved protected more habitat. The shed felt suffocating now. Years of shared environmental passion corrupted by Elena's utilitarian logic. My hands clenched into fists. At what cost? Jennifer's spine? Miguel's lungs? Elena's silence spoke volumes. She turned away, her shoulders rigid. She moved to a storage cabinet I'd never noticed before, pulling out a tablet. The screen lit up with aerial surveillance footage. Look at this, Tom. Real-time monitoring of Whitman Creek Preserve. We've documented every vehicle, every person entering protected areas. The display showed thermal signatures moving through forest canopy, white shapes against black backgrounds. The technology was impressive and invasive. I recognized my own heat signature from routine tree assessments, a glowing figure 40 feet up in the Douglas fir. You've been watching me work. Elena's finger traced movement patterns across the display. Watching everything. That's how conservation succeeds in the 21st century. The surveillance grid's scope became clear through her demonstration. Dozens of cameras, hundreds of hours of footage, all of it capturing human movement in what should have been protected wilderness. I studied the thermal footage more carefully, recognizing property boundaries that extended far beyond conservation areas. These cameras monitor private residences. The Riverside Conservation Area borders 12 private properties. Elena's tablet showed heat signatures from houses, vehicles, people in their own backyards, children playing, families barbecuing. All of it recorded, cataloged, analyzed. Comprehensive ecosystem protection requires understanding human impact patterns, she said. My environmental training recognized the violation of privacy rights, federal wiretapping laws, constitutional protections. This isn't conservation, it's corporate espionage. Elena's environmental justifications began revealing their true corporate purpose. The shed's walls seemed to pulse with the weight of surveillance implications. Elena set the tablet down, her environmental mask finally dropping completely. Her voice carried corporate efficiency now. No trace of the passionate conservationist I'd married. Development corporations pay premium rates for comprehensive land use intelligence. Private property monitoring provides behavioral patterns that predict development pressure. My world shifted. The woman I'd shared a bed with for 3 years, who'd spoken so passionately about protecting ecosystems, was something else entirely. You're selling surveillance data to developers? The shed's familiar tools and equipment now felt like props in an elaborate deception. The climbing gear we'd used together on weekend tree surveys, the environmental testing equipment I'd helped her calibrate, all of it part of a business model I'd never suspected. EcoGuard provides environmental consulting and strategic intelligence services. Both protect our mission. I realized I'd been married to a corporate spy. I backed toward the shed door, the surveillance equipment suddenly feeling like evidence of a crime I was complicit in. The $1.2 million in client fees wasn't for ecosystem protection. It was for corporate intelligence gathering. Elena blocked my path, her stance shifting from environmental consultant to business protector. Her body language changed, shoulders squared, chin raised. The transformation was complete. Every development project we help optimize reduces overall environmental impact. Strategic intelligence serves conservation. The shed's fluorescent light buzzed ominously overhead. My hand found the door handle, cold metal against my palm. You're justifying corporate espionage with environmental rhetoric. Elena's eyes hardened with business determination. I'm maximizing conservation outcomes with available resources. Elena stepped closer, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. You have 2 choices, Tom. Continue supporting real environmental protection or destroy everything we've built together. The shed's metal walls reflected her words back, amplifying the ultimatum. I felt the door handle cold against my palm, my only escape route, built on lies and surveillance. Elena's wedding ring caught the light as she gestured toward their shared equipment. Built on results, EcoGuard has protected more habitat than any traditional conservation group. I realized our marriage had become another form of surveillance, monitoring my loyalty to her corporate environmental empire. Every conversation about my work, every detail I'd shared about tree assessments and forest access had been intelligence gathering. The 360-degree surveillance grid, I said, understanding flooding through me. It's not just monitoring wildlife violations. You're gathering corporate intelligence on private property owners for development projects. Elena's silence confirmed everything. I pushed the door handle down and stepped into the morning air. Elena didn't follow me out of the shed. My boots crunched on gravel as I walked to my truck, the thermal camera and encrypted drive still clutched in my hands like evidence of a crime I'd just witnessed. The drive to the Fish and Wildlife Service building took 40 minutes through downtown traffic. Every red light gave me time to think about what I was about to do. Destroy my marriage. Possibly destroy Elena's business. But those cameras in the trees, they'd turn the forest into a prison. Sarah's office smelled like government coffee and old paperwork. She sat behind a metal desk that had seen better decades, her badge clipped to a navy blazer. I'd called ahead, told her I had evidence of federal surveillance violations. Mr. Thomas, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. You mentioned unauthorized surveillance equipment? I placed the thermal camera on her desk. The device looked smaller here, less threatening than it had 60 feet up in the canopy. 156 cameras across 847 acres, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. My wife's company installed them using my tree assessment reports. Sarah picked up the camera, turning it over in her hands. Her expression shifted from professional interest to something harder. This is military-grade equipment. Northrop Grumman thermal imaging. She looked up at me. Your wife did this? Elena Thomas, EcoGuard Environmental Consulting. The words tasted bitter. She's been selling surveillance data to development corporations. Called it Strategic Intelligence Services. I slid the flash drive across her desk. GPS coordinates for every camera location. Photographs of the installations. Audio recordings of her admitting to the operation. Sarah inserted the drive into her computer. The screen filled with my documentation, photos of cameras hidden in bark, thermal footage of private property, Elena's tablet showing the surveillance grid. Sarah scrolled through everything, her jaw tightening with each image. This violates federal wiretapping statutes, she said finally. 18 U.S.C. 2511, unauthorized surveillance of private property. She looked at me directly. You understand what this means for your wife? The weight of my decision settled in my chest like a stone. I understand. Federal investigation starts immediately. We'll need your full cooperation. I nodded. The coffee she'd offered sat cooling in my hands. Through her office window, I could see the city skyline, but all I thought about was the forest canopy, finally free. Elena's Lexus was already in our driveway when I got home. She'd beaten me back by 20 minutes. I found her in the kitchen, her EcoGuard business cards scattered across the granite counter like fallen leaves. Her laptop was open, showing what looked like financial records. You destroyed everything we built, she said without looking up. Her voice carried a rage I'd never heard before. 15 years of marriage, and you chose trees over your own wife. I stood by the kitchen window, watching Riley play on her swing set in the backyard. She was 12 now, old enough to sense tension, but too young to understand what was happening to her family. I protected the forest, I said quietly. You exploited it. Elena slammed her laptop shut. Exploited it? I was saving it. Those cameras caught 3 illegal logging operations, 2 dumping sites, and violated federal law. I turned to face her. You used my work to spy on private citizens. You sold their data to corporations. Her face twisted with something between rage and desperation. The federal investigation starts Monday. They're seizing our equipment. She swept the business cards off the counter. They scattered across the tile floor like confetti. 24 employees, Tom. 24 people losing their jobs because you couldn't trust me. Outside, Riley pumped her legs on the swing, reaching higher with each arc. The Douglas firs beyond our property lines swayed in the evening breeze, their branches finally clean of electronic parasites. I trusted you for 15 years, I said. You used that trust to turn me into an accomplice. Elena's shoulders sagged. For a moment, she looked smaller, vulnerable. Then her spine straightened. I won't forgive you for this. The house felt hollow despite our raised voices. Through the window, I watched Riley jump from her swing, landing safely in the soft grass below. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who wouldn't meet my eyes. Elena had moved out 3 days earlier, taking half our furniture and all her consulting files. The house echoed now when Riley and I walked through it, our footsteps too loud in the empty spaces. I signed my name carefully at the kitchen table, my arborist-trained hands steady despite the magnitude of what I was losing. 15 years of marriage, reduced to legal documents and asset division. The pen felt heavier than my climbing gear. Riley sat across from me, eating cereal before school. Is Mommy coming home for dinner tonight? I set the pen down. No, sweetheart. Mommy's living in her new apartment now, remember? But why? Her spoon clinked against the bowl. Did you have a fight? How do you explain surveillance and federal investigations to a 12-year-old? How do you tell your daughter that sometimes protecting what matters costs everything else? Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things, I said. And sometimes those disagreements are too big to fix. Riley nodded like she understood, but her eyes held confusion. She was too young to grasp the weight of moral choices, the price of integrity. Through the kitchen window, I could see the forest canopy stretching endlessly beyond our property. The trees that had witnessed everything, Elena's deception, my discovery, the federal investigation that followed. They stood unchanged, patient as always, while human lives shattered around their roots. I finished signing the papers and sealed them in the return envelope. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warming the empty spaces where Elena's things used to be. Marcus called me into his office at Cascade Forest Management that afternoon. He closed the door with unusual formality, something he'd never done in my 3.5 years working there. My employment file sat open on his desk between us, thick with performance reviews and safety certifications. The federal investigation mentioned your involvement, Marcus said, his tone carefully neutral. He was trying to gauge whether I was a liability or a whistleblower. Agent Sarah contacted our office yesterday. My stomach tightened. I reported violations of federal surveillance laws. My tree assessments were used without consent for illegal surveillance operations. Marcus nodded slowly, processing the legal implications. Your position here is secure, Tom. What you did took courage. He closed my file. Most people would have looked the other way, kept quiet to protect their marriage. Relief flooded through my shoulders. I've been carrying the fear of unemployment on top of everything else, wondering if my professional integrity would survive Elena's destruction. The company supports your decision, Marcus continued. We can't have our assessments used for unauthorized surveillance. It compromises our credibility with federal agencies. Through his office windows, I could see the municipal forest where I'd be working next week. Clean trees, honest work, no hidden agendas buried in their bark. Thank you, I said. The words felt inadequate for the security he was offering. Marcus leaned back in his chair. How are you holding up? Personally, I mean. I thought about Riley eating cereal alone, about the empty house, about Elena's rage. Taking it one day at a time. That evening, Miguel Santos waited for me at the downtown coffee shop, his portable oxygen concentrator humming quietly beside his chair. The machine's steady rhythm punctuated our conversation like a mechanical heartbeat. His face had the gray pallor of someone whose lungs couldn't quite keep up anymore. No respirators, no hazmat training, Miguel said between careful breaths. Elena said the work was routine environmental monitoring, just basic tree maintenance. He paused to adjust his oxygen flow. I trusted her. We all did. I watched him struggle with each word, anger building in my chest like pressure in a boiler. What exactly happened up there? The lithium battery chemicals. Miguel touched his chest gently. Caustic fumes when we drilled the mounting holes. Elena said the batteries were eco-friendly, nothing dangerous. His laugh turned into a cough. Spent 18 months breathing that stuff without protection. The coffee shop's warm atmosphere felt obscene against the cold reality of what Elena had done to her workers. I thought about her environmental mission, her talk of protecting ecosystems. She'd poisoned the very people doing her dirty work. The federal settlement will cover your medical costs, I promised. Agent Sarah confirmed it yesterday. Miguel nodded gratefully, his eyes clear despite his physical struggles. At least the trees are safe now. That's what matters, right? The forest doesn't have those cameras anymore. I studied his face, seeing genuine concern for the preserve, even after what it had cost him. This man understood environmental protection better than my wife ever had. David Kruger approached me at the forestry equipment supplier the following week, his manner apologetic and defeated. I was examining new climbing harnesses when he appeared beside me, looking like he hadn't slept in days. I never knew about the surveillance aspect, David insisted, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena said it was ecosystem protection, monitoring illegal logging, tracking poachers. I set down the harness and studied the man who'd helped install cameras throughout the preserve. You drilled into old-growth trees without permits, David. You compromised their structural integrity. His shoulders sagged under the weight of his complicity. I know, God, I know. He ran his hands through his hair. The federal charges are serious. My lawyer says I'm looking at substantial fines, possible jail time. Around us, legitimate forestry tools hung from display hooks. Honest equipment for honest work. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. I'm cooperating fully with the investigation, David continued, turning over all installation records, equipment manifests, everything Elena had me document. Good, I said. The forest deserves that much. 3 weeks later, I climbed my first tree since the federal investigation concluded. The massive Douglas fir stood in the newly protected section of Whitman Creek Preserve, its bark unmarked by drill holes or mounting hardware. My ropes moved smoothly through branches that held only natural growth, no hidden surveillance equipment. At 120 feet, I performed a genuine canopy health assessment, measuring growth rings with my increment borer, checking for disease, documenting natural wildlife habitat, recording actual forest data for legitimate conservation purposes. No hidden cameras tracked my movements. No corporate agenda corrupted my observations. The view from the canopy stretched across 847 acres of truly protected forest. Morning sunlight filtered through Douglas fir needles, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted with the wind. This was what the preserve was supposed to be: wild, unmonitored, free. My radio crackled with Marcus requesting my assessment report. Tom, how's that Douglas fir looking? Healthy growth patterns? No signs of disease, I responded. Natural wildlife activity throughout the canopy. Copy that. Good work. This was real forestry work again. Honest data for honest purposes. Riley visited me for our weekend custody arrangement, her backpack full of school projects about forest ecosystems. She'd drawn pictures of trees with birds' nests and squirrel dens, understanding instinctively what her mother had forgotten. "Why did Mommy's company hurt the trees?" she asked as we walked the preserve trails. I chose my words carefully. Sometimes people think they're protecting something, but they're actually harming it. Real protection means leaving trees alone to grow naturally. Riley nodded solemnly, her 12-year-old mind grasping the concept better than many adults. We stopped at the base of my favorite climbing tree, its bark healing from old drill holes where camera mounts had been removed. "The trees are happy now," Riley observed, touching the Douglas fir's rough bark. "Yes," I agreed. "They're free to be what they're supposed to be." 6 months later, I received the final federal investigation report. $2.8 million in federal penalties against EcoGuard, full restitution to injured workers, Elena's permanent prohibition from environmental consulting. The company dissolved, its assets liquidated to pay damages. I set the report aside and picked up my climbing gear for another day of legitimate canopy assessment. The morning air carried the scent of Douglas fir needles and natural forest sounds. No electronic humming, no hidden machinery, just the forest being itself. My truck radio played softly as I drove toward the preserve. The trees waited for my professional care, not exploitation. Real environmental protection, the kind that respected both the forest and the people who worked in it. Frank joined me for coffee afterward, reviewing the preserve's restoration progress. "The forest is healing," he observed, studying my assessment reports. "Wildlife activity is up 30% since the cameras were removed." Through the cafe window, the Douglas firs stood tall and unmonitored. Natural. Free. "Sometimes the trees know who really protects them," I said quietly. My radio crackled with tomorrow's assignment. Another grove that needed honest assessment, real care. The work continued, but now it meant something again.